A sharp burst of static crackled from the tactical radio mounted on the nearest Humvee. Then nothing. Dead air, the kind of silence that shouldn't exist on an active military installation 47 minutes before a flag officer's arrival. 31 sets of eyes turned toward the vehicle, then most of them turned away because there was nothing interesting to see. Just a woman crouched beside the rear panel of the Humvee, her back to the crowd, her shoulders slightly rounded, her hands moving somewhere inside the open access panel, with the quiet patience of someone who did this kind of thing every day without being thanked for it. Her work pants were dark with old grease stains. Her cap sat low over her face. The name on her contractor badge read Riker L. Civilian Maintenance, Level High. Nobody had bothered to read it. Marine Corps Air Station Camp Pendleton stretched out around the motor pool in every direction, the flight line shimmering in the early California heat, the administrative buildings standing rigid and uniform in the distance, the vast controlled orderliness of a base that had been running missions and training rotations for longer than most of the men standing in that courtyard had been alive. It was a Tuesday morning in late spring, and the base smelled like hot asphalt, exhaust, and the faint metallic tang of equipment that had been cleaned too many times to ever fully lose the smell of use. The convoy was due at 0800 hours. Admiral Victor Hale, 3 stars, Naval Special Warfare Command, a career that had become something between biography and myth in the special operations community, was making a scheduled installation review. 31 personnel had been organized into a receiving formation. Every vehicle in the motor pool had been washed. Every boot had been polished. Every loose piece of equipment had been tucked away or stood upright at attention by proximity. Nobody had thought to ask the civilian maintenance contractor to move until Captain Ethan Ward did. He came around the front of the second Humvee with the particular stride of a man who had decided something before he arrived and simply needed a location to announce it. 28 years old, West Point graduate, 6 months into his first assignment at a major installation. His uniform was immaculate. His camis held their crease like they were afraid not to. He had the kind of jaw that looked assembled for the purpose of giving orders and the kind of eyes that measured worth in terms of rank and polish. He stopped 3 feet from Leah Riker's back. "Who are you, and why are you in this area?" His voice carried. It was engineered to carry, not loud exactly, but projected with the precision of someone who had practiced the technique of being heard without appearing to shout. 14 of the 31 people in the courtyard looked up. The other 17 were already watching. Leah did not turn around immediately. She finished tightening the connector she had been working on, one deliberate quarter turn, and then she straightened, turned, and looked at him with a calm that fell somewhere between professional and indifferent. "Work order W Gach Noi Be Get Noi Delta Gach Noi Mui Chin, sir. Priority 1 maintenance on the tactical communications system, scheduled for 0630. She said it the way someone states a fact they have already stated before and expect to state again. No apology, no performance, no attempt to soften the edges of what was simply true. Ward looked at her badge. Then he looked at her hands, dark with contact grease, a small diagnostic tool clipped to her right index finger. Then he looked back at her face. "This area is restricted during inspection protocol. Contractors are to vacate 20 minutes prior to flag officer arrival. The work order has a hard completion window, sir. The primary communications relay." "I don't need a technical explanation." He took a single step toward her. Behind him, Lieutenant Patrick Olds materialized from the edge of the formation like a shadow with rank insignia, his presence shaped entirely by proximity to Ward. "This is my base. I don't know how your work order got cleared for this block, but I'm telling you now, pack your tools and move to the civilian staging area." Leah held his gaze for 2 seconds. Then she nodded. Once, clean, the kind of nod that contains no submission and no argument, and she began collecting her tools, slowly, methodically, each piece picked up in a specific order and placed in a specific slot in her canvas roll. Ward watched this process with the restless impatience of a man who had expected the nod to be faster. He turned and walked back toward the formation, and as he passed the cluster of junior enlisted near the second vehicle bay, he said, loud enough at exactly the right volume, "Somebody check the contractor access manifest. If she's not on the approved list for this zone, I want her badge pulled." Master Sergeant Leon Hayes, standing at the far end of the vehicle bay with his arms crossed and 30 years of service visible in the set of his shoulders, watched Leah Riker pack her tools. He had not moved during the exchange, he had simply watched. He watched the way she picked up the frequency analyzer, not reaching for it, the way most people reach for a tool, but closing her hand around it from a specific angle, a motion that suggested the object was already mapped in her peripheral awareness before she looked at it. He watched the way her weight shifted when she stood, not the compensating lean of someone tired from crouching, but a realignment. Automatic, spine straight, shoulders open, weight distributed with the unconscious precision of someone whose body had learned to balance against unpredictable terrain. He watched, and he said nothing, because he had spent long enough around people who moved that way to know that saying something too early was the fastest way to be wrong. Staff Sergeant Rita Vega was not as patient. Vega was 26, sharp-tongued and possessed of the specific social confidence that comes from being good at reading rooms and slightly less good at reading people. She held court among the junior NCOs the way some people hold court everywhere, through momentum, through volume, through the simple energy of always having something to say. She leaned toward the woman standing beside her, Corporal Andrea Mills, and spoke at a register designed to be heard without appearing to be directed. Contractor, level 2. She let the classification hang in the air like a punchline assembling itself. You know what that clearance level covers? Changing filters and running cable. That's it. Someone put her down for a priority 1 work order and nobody caught it until Ward showed up. Classic. 2 people laughed. One of them was Corporal Jason Cole, 19 years old, 8 months in the Corps, still calibrating which sounds it was safe to make in which company. He laughed and then stopped laughing and then looked at the woman walking away with her canvas tool roll tucked under her arm, and something in the geometry of her movement made the laugh feel wrong in his mouth. Gunnery Sergeant Craig Bowman did not laugh. Bowman was 41, built like someone had decided to make a man out of a workbench and possessed of the particular intelligence that comes from spending 2 decades keeping complex machinery functional in environments where complexity and function are both regularly tested by hostile parties. He watched Leah Riker move toward the secondary vehicle bay, not the civilian staging area, the secondary vehicle bay, and his eyes narrowed by a fraction. If you're new here, hit that subscribe button right now, because every week we bring you the stories the history books never told. Stories of warriors who serve in silence, who carry their medals where no one can see them. This is one of those stories. Drop a comment below and tell us, where are you watching from today? And if you've ever served alongside someone you completely underestimated, this one's for you. Stay with us. It's just getting started. Leah did not go to the civilian staging area. She moved to the secondary vehicle bay, a narrower space between 2 parked transport trucks, angled away from the main courtyard sightlines, positioned against the eastern wall. She set her tool roll on the hood of the nearer truck, unrolled it with 3 practiced movements, and picked up where she had left off, now working on the auxiliary relay junction that fed back to the primary communications cluster. Her back was to the open courtyard. Her left side faced the wall. From above and behind, the angle of the closest security camera was blocked by the transport truck's bulk. This was not an accident. SFC Owen Briggs found her there 11 minutes later. Briggs ran maintenance for the Eastern Installation Sector, 16 years, a forehead that had seen 3 deployments worth of sun, and the kind of slow, deliberate manner that people sometimes mistake for dullness until they watch him troubleshoot a systems failure in real time. He had come to the secondary bay because he had cross-checked the work order manifest after Ward's announcement, and W Bay Delta Moi Chin was legitimate. Priority 1. Signed by a contracting officer whose clearance level Briggs could verify, but whose name he did not recognize, which in his experience meant either a clerical anomaly or something above his immediate pay grade. He stood at the entrance of the secondary bay and looked at Leah working. She had the auxiliary junction open. Inside was a layered arrangement of cable runs and frequency modules that most of the people on this installation, including Briggs suspected several of the officers who had just watched her get dismissed, would have needed a reference manual to navigate. Leah was navigating it without a reference manual. Her right hand moved in a sequence, 3 contact points, a torque check on the securing bolt, a reading on the diagnostic tool she had clipped back to her finger. That was not wrong, exactly, but that was also not the procedure described in any of the civilian contractor documentation Briggs had ever reviewed. It was, however, very close to the procedure described in the restricted military technical manual for this specific system configuration. A document that was not supposed to be in the hands of a level-high contractor. He cleared his throat. Leah glanced back. "Work order's valid," she said before he could speak. "I checked." Briggs stepped closer, moving to stand beside her rather than behind her. A small repositioning that changed the geometry from supervisory to collaborative. He looked at what she was doing. "That's the SV Baba Bebe cable assembly. Torque spec is 42 inch-pounds on the primary run, 38 on the secondary, she said, not looking up. Connector seating depth is 0.31 inches from the housing edge. Third contact from the left is running 0.2 ohms high, which is why the relay is dropping signal on startup, common failure point on this generation of units. Briggs was quiet for a moment. The torque spec she had cited was correct. The contact resistance figure was correct. The failure mode she had described was correct. None of those figures appeared in any civilian maintenance documentation for this system. They appeared in a document classified restricted, updated 18 months ago, distributed to 17 people on this installation. Briggs counted those 17 people in his head. Leah Riker was not among them. He said, "You've worked on this configuration before." "A few times." She torqued the securing bolt to the correct specification without checking the figure against anything. "Somewhere quieter than this." He watched her hands for another moment, then straightened. He did not go anywhere. He stayed and watched, and his expression did not change, but behind it, something was moving, a slow realignment of what he thought he understood about the morning he was currently in the middle of. Warrant Officer Glenn Tate arrived at the secondary bay 4 minutes later, which was not coincidental. Tate was 34, technically proficient, consistently adequate, the kind of person who filled a role without illuminating it. He carried a tablet and wore the expression of a man performing helpfulness. He came around the corner of the transport truck and appeared to stumble slightly on the uneven surface, catching himself against the hood, and in the process, his arm knocked Leah's tool roll sideways, spilling a frequency analyzer and a torque gauge onto the concrete floor. "Whoa, sorry about that." The apology was prompt, practiced, and empty. "Didn't see it there." He did not bend to help pick anything up. Leah watched the tools land. She watched Tate not move toward them. Then she crouched and began collecting them, and what happened in the next 8 seconds was the kind of thing that most people in the courtyard would not have registered as significant. She picked up the frequency analyzer with her left hand, the torque gauge with her right, 2 smaller connectors with a pincer grip of her right thumb and index finger, and the digital calibration card with her left, all in a single continuous motion, without looking at any of the objects individually, without pausing between items. Every tool returned to its exact position in the roll. 8 seconds. 7 objects. Not one unnecessary movement. Corporal Jason Cole had followed Briggs to the secondary bay out of the vague, unformed curiosity of someone young enough to still follow his instincts before he learned to suppress them. He stood at the bay entrance and watched Leah pick up those tools, and the laugh from earlier sat worse than ever in his chest, because whatever it was he was watching, it was not the movement of a woman who had spent her career changing filters and running cable. Major Prescott Flynn arrived in the secondary bay at the precise moment that Lieutenant Olds arrived from the other direction, and their simultaneous appearance created the brief, awkward pantomime of 2 people who had independently decided to accomplish the same thing and were now slightly annoyed about the coincidence. Flynn was 45, career military, the kind of institutional man whose value to an organization lies entirely in his ability to maintain its procedures regardless of context. "The contractor needs to move to the staging area," Flynn said. He was addressing Briggs rather than Leah, which was its own kind of statement. "We've had this discussion with Captain Ward already." "The work order is valid," Briggs said. "The work order may be valid. Her presence in this specific zone during inspection protocol is not." "The communications relay is not working," Briggs said. "A working communications relay during a flag officer's inspection visit seems—" "Sergeant, I understand your position, but there are procedures." Leah did not look up from the junction board. She had already moved past the 3rd contact point and was working on the cable run verification, and the diagnostic tool on her finger was recording readings that she was processing at a rate that was, had anyone been monitoring the speed of her comprehension, slightly faster than the system's own output stream. In the far corner of the primary courtyard, standing apart from the formation with the particular stillness of someone who had made stillness into a professional discipline, Chief Warrant Officer Mira Kincaid was watching the secondary vehicle bay. She was ostensibly reviewing a tablet, installation infrastructure notes for the inspection review, but her eyes had not moved toward the tablet screen in 4 minutes. She watched Leah Riker's posture while Flynn spoke over her head. She watched the absolutely unchanged angle of Leah's shoulders, not stiff, not braced, not the defensive rigidity of someone enduring indignity, but something quieter than that. Something that had decided, long before this conversation, that the conversation was not relevant. Kincaid had been in the military long enough to know that particular posture. She had seen it exactly twice before, and both times it had been on people whose files contained more redacted pages than readable ones. She opened a new note in her tablet and began typing. The convoy sound came at 0743 hours, the low, sustained rumble of heavy military vehicles moving at institutional pace, the kind of sound that rearranges the air pressure in a motor pool before it arrives visually. Every head in the courtyard turned toward the main gate. Formation stances tightened. Ward appeared from wherever he had been and positioned himself at the front of the reception group with the precise spatial instinct of a man who understood that where you stand when important people arrive determines what they see first. Leah Riker reached into the junction panel and closed her hand around the fourth contact in the auxiliary relay cluster. She did not turn toward the sound of the convoy. She ran her thumb along the cable housing, felt the slight irregularity she had been looking for, a micro-deformation in the connector seating that would not show on a standard diagnostic scan, and began the reseating procedure. Briggs, standing 2 feet away, watched her do this. He had the growing and somewhat uncomfortable sensation of being adjacent to something he didn't fully understand. The convoy pulled through the main gate. 3 vehicles, 2 escort SUVs flanking a large staff car. They moved with the unhurried authority of people who knew the world would wait for them, and it did. Ward was the first to speak when Hale stepped out of the staff car. The Admiral was in his mid-50s, a compact man who carried himself with the specific gravity of someone who had spent decades making decisions that mattered and had stopped needing to announce that fact. His uniform was impeccable. His ribbon rack was extensive. His eyes, when they swept the motor pool, moved with the habitual thoroughness of a man who had spent a career assessing environments for threats, assets, and anomalies, in that order. They passed over Leah Riker's position in the secondary bay and kept moving. And then, almost imperceptibly, they moved back. Ward launched into the reception briefing with the fluency of someone who had rehearsed it. Hale listened, nodded at the appropriate moments, and asked 2 questions that indicated he had read the pre-inspection documentation more carefully than anyone expected. He allowed himself to be guided through the motor pool's primary section, past the formation, past the maintenance logs, past the vehicle inventory display. He did not look back at the secondary bay, but he positioned himself twice during the tour, in spots that gave him a sightline to it. Rita Vega had resumed her commentary. The audience had shifted. Fewer people now, the formation having broken into informal clusters during the tour portion of the inspection. But Vega's instinct for social territory was well developed, and she understood that commentary only has value when it reaches the right recipients. She placed herself near 2 junior officers and a cluster of senior NCOs, and she spoke with the light, confident tone of someone stating obvious facts. I heard she got the work order through a clerical error on the contracting side. Someone approved the wrong zone access level. Security's reviewing it now. She paused to let this settle. Happens with contractors. They work one base, they pick up documentation from another, they start confusing what they're cleared for. One of the junior officers, a lieutenant who had been on station for 3 months and was still calibrating which voices to trust, nodded. Gunnery Sergeant Bowman, standing 4 feet away, heard every word of this. He turned his head slightly toward Vega and then turned it back without comment. He had a particular quality of silence. Not the silence of agreement, not the silence of conflict avoided, but the silence of a man filing information in a place where it would be retrievable later. He had made a decision. He walked to the secondary bay. Leah was finishing the cable run verification. The auxiliary relay was responding correctly now. The diagnostic tool on her finger cycling through green confirmations with the steady patience of a machine that did not care whether the work had been appreciated. Frequency hopping configuration, Bowman said without preamble. A N-gach cheo PRC gach neumot saube, jamming-resistant environment. What's your hop rate parameter for tactical operations in a contested electronic warfare space? He said it the way people say things when they want to know whether someone actually knows what they're talking about, or whether they've been performing knowledge at a level that hasn't been tested yet. Leah finished the confirmation cycle, set the diagnostic tool down, looked at Bowman with the patient attention of someone who has been asked to verify something they learned a long time ago. Standard hop rate is baseline at 113 hops per second. In a high-threat EW environment, you're adjusting the spread spectrum bandwidth, typically operating between 20 and 512 MHz, with the classification parameters setting the upper bound at 400 MHz for inter-unit coordination. The anti-jam margin on the 163 runs approximately 17.4 decibels above standard. If you're seeing degraded performance in a dense jamming environment, your first diagnostic check is the crypto-variable synchronization on the frequency set, not the hardware. She paused. Do you want the failure mode decision tree from there, or is that sufficient? Bowman did not answer for 3 seconds. In those 3 seconds, something in his expression performed a quiet and private recalibration. That'll do, he said, and he walked away without another word, which was, for Bowman, the equivalent of a standing ovation. Briggs had heard the exchange. He was already pulling up something on his tablet, a cross-reference query against the base's technical documentation system. And the result came back with a classification banner before it showed him anything useful. The specific parameter figures Leah had cited, the 17.4 decibel anti-jam margin, the 400 MHz upper classification bound, were not in any open-access technical manual. They were in a document marked Restricted, available to personnel with a specific access level that was not available to any civilian maintenance contractor on this installation. Briggs looked at the banner. Then he looked at Leah. Then he flagged Warrant Officer Mira Kincaid across the courtyard and held up his tablet in a gesture that was too small to read from a distance and too deliberate to be accidental. Leon Hayes had been circling closer to the secondary bay with the unhurried patience of a large animal that knows it isn't being watched. He arrived at the corner of the transport truck while Bowman was walking away, which meant he had heard exactly enough to recalibrate what he was looking at. He stood 3 feet from Leah, who had gone back to work on the final verification sequence of the primary relay module, and looked at her right forearm, where her sleeve had pulled up during the cable work. There was a scar along the outer edge of the forearm, not a single line but a complex of disrupted tissue, the kind of pattern that results from a specific category of blast injury. The kind of pattern Hayes had seen before, in Fallujah, on personnel who had been close to something that went wrong in a particular way. He stood there for a moment. Then he walked back toward Briggs, moving with the measured unhurriedness of someone carrying information that doesn't need to be rushed. "You see her arm?" Hayes said. Briggs nodded without looking up from his tablet. "I saw it. That's not a workplace injury." "No," Briggs said. "It's not." Neither of them said anything further. They stood at the edge of the secondary bay and watched Admiral Hale complete his motor pool tour with Ward still anchored at his shoulder, and the sound of Ward's briefing voice carried to them in fragments, professional, rehearsed, confident, and entirely unaware of what was accumulating quietly in the secondary vehicle bay behind him. Captain Sandra Holt moved through the courtyard in the direction of the administrative building, which was where she was supposed to be going because she had a legitimate reason to be there, and the route happened to take her past the eastern wall of the secondary vehicle bay. She was J-High intelligence, and her presence on installation during a flag officer review was unremarkable. Intelligence personnel were routinely present during senior leadership visits. She did not slow her pace when she passed Leah's position. She did not make eye contact. Her hand dropped to her side as she passed the hood of the transport truck, a natural swing of the arm in motion. And when she drew her hand back, there was nothing in it. But on the surface of Leah's tool roll, a small folded piece of paper had appeared between the frequency analyzer and the calibration card. Leah did not look at it for 4 minutes. Then she picked it up, read it in the time it takes to read 3 words, folded it back, and slid it into the left cargo pocket of her work pants. Her expression did not change, but she moved the diagnostic tool from her right index finger to her left, which freed her right hand, and she ran her right hand briefly over the outer housing of the junction panel she had been working on. Not a check, not a diagnostic, a different kind of survey. She was looking for something that wasn't supposed to be there. Ward returned from the motor pool tour with the satisfied energy of a man who had performed competently and knew it. He scanned the courtyard with the proprietary gaze of someone taking inventory of his territory, and his scan reached the secondary vehicle bay, and he saw Leah Riker still there, still working. His face did something that was not quite surprise and not quite anger, but occupied the specific space between them where decision lives. He walked to the secondary bay. Olds materialized at his shoulder. The man had a gift for proximity that would have been useful in other contexts. "I gave you a clear instruction," Ward said. He kept his voice low this time, controlled, which was more dangerous than loud. "The civilian staging area is on the western side of the maintenance building. You have been here for..." He checked his watch. 23 minutes since I last spoke to you. "The primary relay system has a fault that will affect communications capability during the inspection, sir." Leah did not stop working. "I am 20 minutes from completion." "I don't care about the timeline." Ward stepped closer. The space between them contracted to the kind of proximity that is either intimate or threatening, and this was not intimate. I have told you twice to clear this area. You are a level high contractor. You do not get to decide which orders apply to you. The word contractor came out with a specific emphasis. Not loud, but weighted, the way you emphasize something when you want the people nearby to hear the category you've put someone in. Briggs spoke from 2 feet towards left. The work order is valid, Captain. It's been verified. I understand that, Sergeant, and I'm telling you that during inspection protocol, the work order takes secondary priority to... To what? Briggs said. It was not a challenge exactly. It was a very specific kind of question, the kind that contains the answer inside it and invites the person being asked to hear it. Ward looked at Briggs for a moment, then he looked at Leah. Then he pulled out his radio and called Olds to initiate a formal contractor access review. A process that, once initiated, created a paper trail and required Leah to remain in the bay pending verification, which was, depending on how you looked at it, either an effective way to remove someone from an area or an extremely effective way of keeping them in it. If this story has you on the edge of your seat, smash that like button right now. It tells us you want more content just like this. Turn on your notifications so you never miss a drop. We're about to hit the moment where everything Leah has been hiding starts to leak through the cracks. One wrong word, one too smooth movement at a time. The people in that motor pool have absolutely no idea what's standing right next to them. Don't look away. The access review took 12 minutes and produced a result that made Olds blink twice before he handed the tablet to Ward. The screen read, "Access restricted. Clearance level 4. Contact security officer immediately." Tate was standing nearby. He looked at the screen over Ward's shoulder and said, "Could be a system error. Level high contractors don't go above level 2. The database flags anomalies." Ward accepted this explanation with the efficiency of a man who needed an explanation and found one available. "Get it resolved," he told Olds. Then he turned back to Leah, who had been watching the tablet result with an expression that revealed precisely nothing, and said, "Pending resolution, you're grounded to this location." "Understood," Leah said. She turned back to the junction panel, and Major Flynn appeared at the entrance of the secondary bay with the expression of a man who had received a situation report that he now needed to formally contain, and he delivered a 3-sentence summary of the access review result to Ward with the professional briskness of someone who had decided the situation was under control. It was not under control. Cole had been at the entrance of the secondary bay long enough to have heard most of what had happened. He was young enough that his instincts were still louder than his training in certain moments, and his instinct was pushing him toward the woman in the work pants who had packed 7 tools in 8 seconds and cited classified specifications without blinking and received a clearance flag that made his CO go quiet for a moment. He stepped forward into the bay, past Hayes, past Kincaid, who had arrived at the entrance with her tablet and was not writing anything, and he stopped 2 feet from Leah's working position. "Ma'am, are you okay?" Leah glanced back at him. She took in his rank insignia, his age, the particular combination of boldness and uncertainty that lives in a 19-year-old who has just done something he isn't sure was the right call. "Thank you, Corporal," she said. That was it. 2 words. But the way she said Corporal, not as a rank she was reading off his sleeve, but as a category she had already registered before she looked, made Cole's neck feel strange in a way he couldn't explain. He stepped back. He stood at the entrance of the secondary bay and watched her work. And he thought about how a level high maintenance contractor who didn't belong in this zone and probably only got here through a paperwork error had just looked at him and said his rank the way officers said his rank. He thought about the tools, 8 seconds, 7 objects. He thought about the scar on her arm that he had glimpsed when she turned toward him, the complex disrupted tissue that he had not seen enough of the world yet to name, but that Hayes, standing behind him, had named without speaking. The convoy sound had faded. The inspection was moving indoors. Admiral Hale and his escort had been guided toward the administrative building for the formal briefing portion of the review, and the motor pool was settling into the post-arrival quiet that follows the departure of important people. Not relaxed exactly, but at a lower register. Except that Hale had not gone fully indoors. He stood at the edge of the motor pool, in the shadow of the administrative building's overhang, and he was looking at the secondary vehicle bay. He had positioned himself there naturally, without announcement, in the way of someone who had a habit of looking at things from the angle that other people weren't looking at. Mira Kincaid stood beside him, her tablet open, her stylus moving. She was writing something that was not related to the inspection documentation. Hale said nothing. He watched Leah Riker work for approximately 45 seconds. Then he said, very quietly, to no one in particular, the way a man speaks when he's thinking out loud and doesn't expect a response. "Who approved that work order?" Kincaid made a note. "I'm looking into it, sir." The afternoon light was shifting, the sun moving off the flat face of the motor pool and turning the secondary vehicle bay into a pocket of warm shadow. When the tactical communications cluster mounted at the bay's operations station blinked twice and went dark. Not just degraded, not just intermittent, dark. The AN-Gach Cheo RC-Gach Neumatmatkung, the primary mobile tactical communications platform for the base's vehicle-mounted coordination systems, had failed completely. The screen was black, the frequency display was off, the system that connected every unit on this installation to the coordination network that a flag officer's inspection was supposed to evaluate was no longer operating. 7 technicians arrived in 4 minutes, called in by the Duty Communications NCO with a controlled urgency that landed just below the threshold of panic. They clustered around the AN-Gach Cheo VRC-Gach Neumatmatkung with tablets and reference tools, and the particular focused energy of people who understand that the thing they are looking at should not be the way it currently is. 12 minutes passed, then 17, then 22. No one had solved it. Briggs stood at the edge of the cluster, watching, and he could see what they were doing, checking the obvious fault points, running the standard diagnostic sequence, verifying the power supply, testing the antenna connections, and he could also see that none of it was working, which meant either the fault was somewhere the standard diagnostic sequence didn't reach, or the fault was not a standard fault. He turned and walked to the secondary vehicle bay. Leah Riker was leaning against the transport truck, her tool roll re-rolled and tucked under her arm. She was watching the cluster around the AN-Gach Cheo VRC-Gach Neumatmatkung for the patient attention of someone waiting for a process to complete itself. Briggs stopped in front of her. "The primary tactical communications platform failed," he said. "I know," she said. She had known when it happened. The specific quality of a system dying was audible to people who had spent enough time listening for it. "Nobody on the technical team can isolate the fault. I know that too." Briggs exhaled slowly. He was a man who had spent 16 years making practical decisions in situations that did not offer the luxury of complete information. He made one now. "I can't speak to why you're here or what your actual clearance level is," he said. "I don't need to. I need that system operational in the next 10 minutes before this installation review logs a communications failure during a flag officer visit." He nodded toward the AN-Gach Cheo VRC-Gach Neumatmatkung. "Whatever you are, you're not a level-high contractor, and I think you know how to fix that system." Leah looked at him. She looked at the cluster of technicians, then at the dark screen of the AN-Gach Cheo VRC-Gach Neumatmatkung, then back at Briggs. Then she straightened, tucked the tool roll under her left arm, and walked toward the communication station. Ward stepped in front of her. He had materialized from the far side of the motor pool. He had been watching too. Everyone had been watching. And his positioning was calculated, deliberate, the physical grammar of authority blocking movement. His expression had shed the last of its controlled professionalism and arrived somewhere rawer and less managed. "I don't care what she just fixed," he said, not to Briggs, to Leah. His voice had dropped to the register where anger becomes something quieter and therefore harder to argue with. "You do not touch that system. You are a civilian contractor who is currently under an access review. Whatever Sergeant Briggs thinks he has permission to authorize, he does not. This is my base." He leaned forward slightly, the particular lean of someone choosing size as an argument. "Do you understand me, or do I need to have you escorted out?" Leah held his gaze. In the formation area, 6 people were watching. In the vehicle bay, 4 more. By the administrative building overhang, Mira Kincaid was typing quickly. And Admiral Victor Hale, who had come back out of the administrative building's entrance 30 seconds ago for reasons he had not explained to the aide who had been standing next to him, stood at the far edge of the motor pool with his hands clasped behind his back. He was watching. Leah said, "Sir," one word, flat, neutral, perfectly respectful in grammatical form. And then Flynn appeared at her shoulder, not Ward's shoulder, Leah's, and said, "Captain, the communications team has formally requested technical assistance from available maintenance personnel. That request supersedes zone protocol under Technical Maintenance Order 77 Alpha." Ward looked at Flynn. Flynn looked back at him with the expression of a man who has just discovered that the rules he was applying do not apply in the way he applied them, and is currently deciding whether to acknowledge this. In the silence of that look, Leah walked past Ward to the AN-Gach Cheo VRC-Gach Neumatmatkung. She sat down at the operator's station, set her tool roll on the deck beside her, reached forward, and in 4 precise rotations of the frequency selector dial. 4, without hesitation, without reference, without the telltale pause of someone thinking. Input a frequency configuration that the Duty Communications NCO, standing directly behind her, did not recognize from any standard operating procedure he had ever been trained on. Briggs looked at the numbers on the selector display. He looked at them for a long moment. Then he reached for his tablet and typed them quietly, cross-referencing against the system documentation he had been building in his head for the last 40 minutes. The result came back before Leah had finished the configuration sequence. The banner that appeared above the results was the same banner that had appeared before, the one with the clearance level. But below it, this time, because his own clearance had been elevated by the Flag Officer Review Protocol to allow full documentation access during the inspection, he could see one additional line. Source: Cipher Run Technical Protocol Version 3, JSOC Restricted. Briggs stared at the screen. Cipher Run. He knew that designation. Most people at his level didn't. It was the kind of program that existed in the negative space of official documentation, referenced by absence rather than inclusion. A signals intelligence program embedded in special operations from 2013 to 2019 officially dissolved, its personnel redistributed, its records sealed under a classification level that most installation security officers would not have personal access to. He looked at Leah Riker's hands on the communications console, and he thought, redistributed, not gone, redistributed. The screen of the A.N. Gach Cheo, V.R.C. Gach Noi Mut Mot came to life. It did not flicker back gradually, the way systems do when they're coaxed. It came back clean and complete. Frequency display bright, connection indicators green, the network coordination grid populating in real time as the system re-established contact with every unit on the installation, 93 seconds from the moment she sat down. The 7 technicians who had spent 22 minutes on the problem stood very still. And then the emergency frequency, the channel designated for units operating in the field beyond the base perimeter, spiked. A broken transmission, partially obscured by interference, the specific frequency degradation that indicated a unit operating at the edge of its communication range. Base actual, Recon Team 4, we have contact, 2 wounded, requesting, static. Grid 779er, frequency compromised, unable to authenticate. The duty communications officer stepped toward the console. He ran the standard authentication sequence. It failed. The interference was corrupting the handshake protocol. He tried the backup frequency. Failed again. He looked at Briggs. Briggs looked at the console. He looked at the authentication failure message. He looked at the frequency interference pattern, and something in the way the interference was distributed across the spectrum struck him as wrong in a specific, purposeful way. Not random degradation, but shaped, selective. The kind of spectrum disruption that has a source. He looked at Tate. Tate was standing at the edge of the technical cluster. His tablet was in his hand, angled slightly down and away, and his thumb was moving across the screen in a pattern that was not the pattern of someone reading a document. Briggs noted this, filed it, said nothing. Leah was already at the frequency selector. She had not been invited back to the console. She had simply moved to it while everyone else was processing the emergency transmission, with the unhesitating directness of someone who has identified a problem and located themselves at the only available solution. Her hands moved across the controls in a sequence that was nothing like the standard authentication protocol and nothing like any frequency configuration in the open documentation. Flynn started to speak. She doesn't have authorization. Hale raised his right hand. Not a gesture of command exactly. A gesture of silence, small, precise, and absolute. Flynn stopped mid-word. The motor pool went quiet. Not gradually, immediately. The specific quality of quiet that enters a space when the person with the most authority in it has stopped talking and everyone else decides to follow. Leah made 4 adjustments to the frequency selector. She checked one reading on the signal monitoring display. Then she reached forward, keyed the transmit switch, and spoke into the radio. Alpha Tango 7, Lima Charlie, Spectre Actual, Authenticate November Kilo 05. 7 words. Spoken in the calm, clear, unhurried register of someone repeating a code they have said many times before, in conditions considerably more demanding than a motor pool inspection visit. The motor pool stayed quiet. 3 seconds. Then the radio answered. Spectre Actual confirmed, Grid 779er, 2 wounded. Requesting extraction authorization. The voice on the other end, the field operator who had been transmitting through degraded frequency into failed authentication protocols. was audibly calmer. Not because the situation had changed, but because whoever was on the other end of that radio was someone they recognized, someone they trusted, someone whose code told them exactly who they were talking to. Leah began coordinating the extraction. Her voice was even, professional, methodical. She was confirming the grid, verifying the casualty status, calculating the extraction route, and as she worked, Admiral Victor Hale stood in the center of his motor pool and processed what he had just heard. November Kilo 05. He had heard that code once before. He had heard it in a classified briefing 11 years ago, where it had been presented to him as the authentication identifier for a single operational program. He had authorized the creation of that code. He had signed the documentation that established it. And then the program had been dissolved, the documentation sealed, and the code had entered the category of things that existed only in classified archives and in the memories of the people who had been there. He had been one of those people. He looked at the woman coordinating the field extraction at the communications console of his motor pool, and he looked at her with the expression of a man who has been presented with something that should not exist and is now required to explain it. His right hand moved. He straightened. A small movement, a degree or two of additional alignment in his posture, but absolute, and his right arm rose to the brim of his cover in a motion that was precise and practiced and completely unmistakable to every person in the motor pool who had ever worn a uniform. He saluted, not the casual indoor acknowledgement, the full formal rendering of honors. Hand flat, angle correct, held. He said 4 words. Lieutenant Colonel Riker, at attention. The motor pool did not react immediately. It processed. Ward's body performed its reaction before his conscious mind could moderate it. 2 steps backward, not large but involuntary. The physical vocabulary of a person whose frame of reference has been structurally removed. His mouth opened. Nothing came out. He closed it. His hand moved to his belt, not reaching for anything, just the fingers of a man who needs something to hold on to, finding the nearest available edge. Flynn looked at Ward, then at Leah, then at Hale. The mathematics of the situation was resolving in real time across his face, and the result was not favorable to any of the positions he had taken in the last 40 minutes. Vega had been standing at the edge of the vehicle bay entrance, and her expression, which had been carrying for the last several hours the specific light of someone who is winning a social situation, underwent the kind of rapid reconfiguration that faces perform when they realize the situation is not what they thought it was. She had not moved, but she was somehow smaller. Bowman did not move. He looked at the Admiral's salute, looked at Leah, and nodded once, the slow, deliberate nod of a man who has just received confirmation of something he had already been filing toward. Cole's phone was in his hand. He did not remember taking it out. Hayes did not move either. He stood at the entrance of the secondary bay and watched, and his expression was the expression of a man who has been waiting for a thing to become visible that he has known was there for some time, and whose reaction to its visibility is not surprise but something more like relief. Leah Riker, Scarlet Riker, completed the extraction coordination. She confirmed the grid, confirmed the casualty status, confirmed the response team authorization. She issued 4 instructions to the duty communications officer in the same even voice she had been using throughout, and they were the kind of instructions that the duty communications officer followed without question, because of the quality of the voice issuing them, before he had processed any other information about the situation. Then she stood up. She turned away from the console and faced Admiral Hale. She did not return the salute immediately. She let the moment exist. The motor pool, the silence, the 31 witnesses, Ward's stillness, Hale's held hand. She let all of it sit in the air for exactly as long as it needed to, which was 3 seconds, and then she brought her right hand up and returned the salute with the clean precision of someone for whom the motion is not a formality, but a language she speaks natively. "Admiral Hale," she said. "Lieutenant Colonel," he said. He lowered his hand. His expression had moved past recognition into something more complex, the kind of expression that contains multiple understandings simultaneously. "You want to tell me what you're doing at my installation as a level-high contractor?" "I found an anomaly in the tactical communications frequency distribution 6 weeks ago, sir. Consistent with systematic exploitation, not equipment failure. I've been here to identify the source." Hale looked at her. He looked at Tate, who had stopped moving his thumb across the tablet screen and was standing very still. "Did you identify it?" Hale said. "Just now," Leah said. She did not look at Tate directly. She looked at Hale. "The extraction team can confirm when they process the equipment." Sandra Holt appeared at the entrance of the motor pool from the direction of the administrative building. She was walking at the pace of someone who had been waiting for a specific moment and had heard it arrive. She reached Hale's position and stopped, standing beside him with the practiced ease of a person who belonged there. "Admiral Hale," she said. "Captain Sandra Holt, JSOC. I served under Lieutenant Colonel Riker from 2015 to 2018. She was my commanding officer." She extended her credentials. "I've been supporting the operation." Tate was now 6 feet from the entrance of the secondary vehicle bay, moving in the lateral, unhurried way of someone trying to create distance without appearing to create distance. Holt spoke 2 words into her radio. Small words, precise. 2 military policemen who had been staged behind the equipment vehicles since 0700 hours, who had been there before the convoy arrived, before the formation assembled, before anyone noticed the level-high contractor in the secondary bay, stepped forward from 2 directions simultaneously. Tate stopped moving. Briggs turned to look at the tablet in his own hands. He looked at the cipher run reference. He looked at the name printed in the cleared documentation below the classification banner. Riker, Scarlet M. Commanding Officer, Cipher Run Program Hangin Kumtram Muy Bad in Hangin Kumtram Muy Chin. He looked at the photograph attached to the file. A woman in dress uniform, ribbon rack 3 rows deep, Defense Intelligence Medal in the first position, posture so straight it looked like the photograph had been engineered from a definition. He looked up from the tablet. Leah Riker, Scarlet Riker, was standing 20 feet away in a work uniform with grease on the knuckles, answering Admiral Hale's questions in the same even voice she had used to cite torque specifications 6 hours ago. Briggs set the tablet down on the nearest surface. He looked at Hayes. Hayes looked back at him. "Fallujah," Hayes said, quietly. 2008, Briggs said. Hayes nodded once. Neither of them said anything else because there was nothing else that needed to be said in that particular direction. The rest of it was still unfolding. Ward standing at the edge of what he had constructed and watching it become different dimensions than he had believed it to be. Flynn very quietly moving toward a location where he could review the documentation for himself. Cole still holding his phone with the particular frozen quality of someone who is recording history and knows it. At the communications console, the AN Gach Chov RC Gach Noi Mot Kung was routing the extraction coordination for Recon Team 4 with the smooth efficiency of a system that had been repaired correctly. The frequency display was green. The connection grid was populated. The equipment was doing exactly what it was designed to do. It was doing it because Scarlet Riker had fixed it. She had fixed it in 93 seconds. With the same hands that had packed 7 tools in 8 seconds, cited classified specifications without a reference document, and spoken a 7-word radio code that had frozen a motor pool and straightened the spine of an admiral. The same hands that currently held nothing at all, resting at her sides, relaxed, unburdened. While around her, 31 people reconfigured their understanding of the morning they were standing in. The 2 military policemen moved with the efficiency of people who had been waiting for permission and had now received it. Tate did not run. He was too experienced for that, too aware of the geometry of the motor pool, the positions of the personnel, the specific mathematics of a situation that had already closed around him before he understood it was closing. He stood at the edge of the secondary vehicle bay with his tablet in his hand and watched the MPs approach, and his expression performed a brief, controlled collapse. From the practiced neutrality he had maintained for 6 weeks, through something that looked almost like calculation, and into the flat stillness of a man processing the dimensions of what he had lost. "Warrant Officer Glenn Tate," the senior MP said, stopping 2 feet in front of him. It was not a question. "That's correct," Tate said. "Please place the tablet on the surface beside you and place your hands where I can see them." Tate set the tablet down with the careful deliberateness of someone who understood that every movement was now being catalogued. He placed his hands flat on the hood of the transport truck. The second MP moved around to his right side, and the whole process, the securing, the confirmation of identity, the formal notification, took 47 seconds and produced no drama, because Tate had made the precise calculation that drama would not help him, and compliance, at this stage, was the only remaining form of control he had access to. Ward watched this from his position near the motor pool's central aisle. He had not moved since the salute. His body was doing the specific thing bodies do when a person has lost the structural support of the narrative they were inside. It occupied space without quite inhabiting it, present in the motor pool but not fully connected to any of the actions unfolding there. Flynn was watching the tablet that the MP had picked up from the transport truck hood. sealed now in an evidence bag, and his expression had arrived at the particular stillness of a man performing a comprehensive internal audit. Hale let the securing complete itself. He was not a man who interrupted process. He had spent a career understanding that the machinery of consequence needed room to operate, and interference, even well-intentioned interference, created friction that extended timelines and complicated outcomes. So he waited, and when the MPS had completed the initial securing and moved Tate to the vehicle at the motor pool's eastern entrance, Hale turned back to Scarlett Riker. She was standing exactly where she had been. This was something he noticed, not because it was unexpected, but because most people, in the aftermath of a significant reveal, shifted their position. They stepped forward, or stepped back, or oriented themselves toward the reactions of the people around them. Riker stood where she had been standing and watched the securing of Tate with the patient attention of someone who has planned for an outcome and is verifying its execution. "Walk me through it," Hale said. He said it the way senior officers say things when they want information quickly and without the architecture of formal briefing, straight across, peer-to-peer, the register of a conversation between people who understand the same operational language. 6 weeks ago, I identified a frequency anomaly in the installation's tactical communications grid, Scarlett said. Specific signature, not random interference, not equipment degradation, selective suppression in the authentication bands, the kind of signature that indicates someone with technical access to the systems and knowledge of which frequencies the authentication protocols depend on. You flagged it through official channels? I flagged it through Captain Holt. She and I agreed that a formal report would alert whoever was responsible before we could identify them. Hale looked at Holt. Holt confirmed with a small nod. "The work order," he said, "generated through the contracting office by a routing that traces back to a legitimate JSOC support mechanism. The level high designation was intentional. It gave me access to the motor pool without creating the profile that a formal security investigation would generate. And today? The AN-gach Cheo VRC gach Noi Mot Kung failure was not accidental." Scarlett paused. "Tate reconfigured 2 modules in the primary communications cluster between 0600 and 0630 hours. Before I arrived, the reconfiguration created a fault that would surface under load during the inspection. Combined with the frequency suppression he's been running for 6 weeks, it would have prevented the base from coordinating emergency field communications during a high-visibility event." Hale absorbed this. "Recon Team 4. The timing was not coincidental." Her voice was level. "The team's patrol route takes them through Sector 7 on Tuesday mornings. The frequency compromise would have prevented authentication. Without authentication, extraction authorization doesn't clear. 2 wounded operators in a contested perimeter without extraction." The motor pool was very quiet. Not the quiet of a space between events, but the quiet of a space in which people are processing the full weight of what they have just been told. The kind of quiet that has texture and temperature, that sits on the chest in a way that makes breathing feel like an active choice. Hale looked toward the communications console, where the AN-gach Cheo VRC gach Noi Mot Kung was still running the extraction coordination, its displays green, its connections clean. The Duty Communications NCO was at the board, following the procedures Scarlett had established, and from the radio came the intermittent transmission traffic of an extraction in progress. The clipped professional language of military coordination moving at its proper pace toward a successful outcome. 2 wounded operators, Hale said quietly. "Not to anyone. To the air." "They're going to be fine, sir," Scarlett said. "The extraction team is 12 minutes out." Hale turned back to her. He looked at her for a moment with the specific quality of attention that very senior people give to things they are still assembling the full understanding of. Then he said, 6 weeks, alone, under contractor cover, tracking an active intelligence threat on this installation. Captain Holt was my support. 2 of you. It was sufficient." Something shifted in Hale's expression. Not quite a smile, not quite pride, but occupying the territory adjacent to both. It was the expression of a man who recognizes something he has not seen in a while and did not expect to see here. He looked away from her briefly, at the motor pool, at the 31 people who were still present and still processing, and then back. "You're going to need to brief my J-High staff." "Yes, sir." "Today." "Understood." He nodded. Then he turned toward Ward. The motor pool did not go quieter because it was already as quiet as it was going to get. But something in its quality changed. The directional shift of collective attention. 31 people orienting toward what was about to happen with the specific stillness of witnesses who understand that what they are about to observe will be part of how they understand the rest of their careers. Ward stood straight. He was not a coward. Whatever his other qualities, the man had the physical discipline of genuine military bearing, and he applied it now, standing at attention with his hands at his sides and his chin level and his eyes forward. He understood what was coming. He had been in the military long enough to understand it. Hale stopped in front of him. He did not speak immediately. He looked at Ward with the patient, unhurried quality of a man who has time and does not need to create the impression of urgency to establish authority. "Your installation," Hale said. Ward said nothing. There was nothing to say that would not make things worse. An active intelligence operation was running on this base for 6 weeks. Hale kept his voice low. Not for Ward's benefit, but because volume is the tool of people who don't have authority without it. You publicly removed the primary operator from a restricted zone. Twice. You initiated a contractor access review that produced a flag you dismissed without investigation. You physically intervened when she moved to address an emergency communications failure. He paused. "Tell me what you thought you were doing." "I was maintaining inspection protocols, sir." "You were maintaining your idea of who belongs in a space." Hale let that sit for precisely the time it needed. "Those are not the same thing, Captain." Ward's jaw worked slightly. Not in defiance, in the effort of someone trying to hold a correct expression over an expression that wants to be different. Everything just changed in that room. If you saw that coming, drop a specter in the comments right now. If you didn't, welcome to the club. This is exactly what we live for. Share this video with someone who needs to be reminded that the quietest person in the room is almost always the most dangerous one. And if you haven't subscribed yet, do it now, because the consequences are about to hit every single person who got it wrong today. Don't you dare click away. "My office," Hale said. 1400 hours. Bring your duty log from this morning." He turned away from Ward with the finality of a man closing a chapter and addressed Flynn without turning back. "Major Flynn, you reviewed the access review result and accepted an explanation of system error without independent verification." Flynn did not attempt to reframe this. "Yes, sir." "You will document your decision-making process in writing and have it on my desk before this installation review closes." He did not wait for a response. He turned back toward the communications console, toward the evolving picture of the extraction coordination, and his bearing had the quality of a man who has completed one category of action and moved entirely into the next. Scarlet Riker had not moved during any of this. She stood where she had been, in the secondary vehicle bay, with her tool roll under her arm, and she watched the extraction coordination proceed on the AN Gach Cheo VRC Gak Noi Mot Mot hung display with the focused attention of someone who has a personal interest in the outcome. Briggs appeared at her left shoulder. He had his tablet in his hand, but he was not looking at it. "The cipher run documentation," he said. "The technical protocol you were using. I recognized it from the classification banner. I didn't know the program." "Not many people did," Scarlett said. "That was the design. You ran it for 6 years, from 2013 to 2019. Briggs was quiet for a moment. "What did it do?" Scarlett looked at him. "Exactly what it sounds like. Embedded SIGINT capability in special operations environments. We went where the communications problems were and we solved them, or we found out who was creating them." She paused. Both happened more often than the official record reflects. Briggs absorbed this with the patient thoroughness of a man who has just realized the manual he thought he understood was a simplified version of a more complex document. He looked at his tablet, at the classification banner, at the name, at the photo, and then set it face down on the nearest surface. "I owe you an apology," he said. "I didn't intervene sooner." "You intervened when it mattered," Scarlett said. "That's sufficient." It was a precise answer. Not generous, not dismissive, simply accurate. It told him exactly what his intervention had been worth without assigning it more weight than it carried, and without reducing it below its actual value. He recognized the quality of it, the specific fairness of someone who has spent a long time in environments where accurate assessment of capability is the difference between mission success and mission failure, and who has applied that discipline to human evaluation as well as technical evaluation. He nodded. He walked back toward the technical cluster, where the 7 communications technicians were standing in the specific configuration of people who need something to do and are waiting for someone to provide it. Run a full diagnostic on every communications module in the eastern sector, he told them. Document every anomaly regardless of how small it looks. We're looking for anything that matches the signature the lieutenant colonel identified. He looked at them. Let's move. They moved. Leon Hayes came around the transport truck and stopped in front of Scarlett. He was not a man who performed his interactions. He arrived at them directly, without preamble, and what he had to say he said in the manner of something that had been waiting for the right moment. Fallujah, he said. 2008. Scarlett looked at him. Something shifted behind her eyes. Not surprise, but recognition. The particular recognition of someone who has been in enough specific places to know when they are talking to another person who has been there too. Which rotation? She said. Second, April through October. She nodded slowly. I was there in June. 2 weeks. Hayes looked at her arm, at the scar, at the complex disrupted tissue that he had named without speaking several hours ago. I figured it was around then, the signature. He paused. He was a man who spent words the way people spend resources they know to be finite. I'm glad you got out. Most of the way, she said. He nodded. He extended his right hand. She took it. They shook with the particular quality of people who have shared a geography that changes how you understand the word familiar, and then Hayes walked back to his position at the vehicle bay entrance, and Scarlett watched him go with the expression of someone filing a moment they intend to keep. Cole was still standing at the motor pool entrance. His phone was in his pocket now. He had put it away at some point during the exchange between Hale and Ward, with the instinct of someone who understood that certain moments are not for recording, that the act of capturing can sometimes be a way of avoiding presence. He was present. He was very, very present. He waited until Briggs had moved the technical team, until Hayes had walked away, until the cluster of people near the communications console had reorganized itself into the functional configuration of people with specific tasks. Then he stepped forward. He stopped 2 feet from Scarlett Riker. His posture was correct. He had enough training for that, enough months in the Corps for the physical grammar of address to be resident in his body even when the rest of him was uncertain. He stood straight. He looked at her directly. Ma'am, I'm sorry. The words came out without the hesitation he had expected. I laughed earlier. When Sergeant Vega... He stopped. Started again. I didn't know anything, but that's the thing, isn't it? I didn't know anything and I still... Stop, Scarlett said. Not unkind. Precise. He stopped. You stopped laughing, she said. I saw you stop. She looked at him. Not the quick assessment of someone allocating attention, but the actual full attention of someone who has decided a person is worth looking at. That's the moment that matters, not the first instinct, what you do when the first instinct turns out to be wrong. Cole absorbed this. It did not feel like absolution exactly, it felt like information. The specific, operational kind, the kind that changes what you do next. Can I... He stopped, reorganized. Would it be all right if I shook your hand, ma'am? Scarlett looked at him for a beat, then she extended her right hand. He took it. His grip was young and strong and slightly too firm in the way of someone who has been taught that handshakes are about firmness and has not yet learned that they are actually about contact. She shook his hand. Keep watching, she said. Always watch. He nodded. He stepped back. He stood at the entrance of the motor pool and felt the morning rearranging itself in his memory into a configuration that would be with him for a long time. Not because of the dramatic moments, not the salute or the radio code or Tate's securing, but because of the 8 seconds with the 7 tools. The moment before he knew anything. The moment where his instinct had told him something was off and he had laughed instead of listening. He was not going to do that again. Mira Kincaid arrived at Scarlett Riker's position from the administrative building side of the motor pool, her tablet in her hand, her stylus clipped to the edge. She had been writing throughout the morning, steadily, methodically, with the particular focused attention of someone whose job is to ensure that what happens is accurately recorded. Lieutenant Colonel, she said, Chief Warrant Officer. Kincaid looked at her tablet, then at Scarlett. I want to confirm the timeline for the official record. You identified the frequency anomaly 6 weeks ago. You entered the installation under contractor cover at that point, or later? 5 weeks, 3 days ago, Scarlett said. The first week was remote analysis, Kincaid typed. And the source of the work order authorization? Captain Holt can provide the routing documentation. Kincaid noted this without looking up. Then she stopped typing and looked at Scarlett directly. I've been writing about this morning for 4 hours, she said. I noted your position when the Admiral arrived. I noted where you were standing during each of the altercations. I noted the way you oriented your back to the security camera in the secondary bay. She paused. "I want to say, for what it's worth, and I understand it's probably not worth much from someone who didn't say anything at the time, I knew something was wrong with what I was watching." "Why didn't you act on it?" Scarlett asked. It was not an accusation. It was, genuinely, a question. Kincaid was quiet for a moment. "I wasn't certain enough," she said. "I'm good at watching. I'm less good at acting on incomplete information." Scarlett looked at her. "Write that down too," she said. "That's the more important lesson." Kincaid looked at her for a moment. Then she wrote it down. The radio on the communications console emitted a short burst of organized transmission, the specific pattern of an extraction completed and an all-clear transmitted. Every person in the motor pool who recognized the pattern responded in their own way. The duty communications NCO confirmed receipt and logged the time. Hale closed his eyes briefly and opened them. Briggs exhaled. Scarlett Riker did not visibly react. She had been waiting for it, and it arrived, and it meant that two people who had been in a compromised position in a contested perimeter were now in a vehicle heading back to the installation with a medical team, and the frequency that should have prevented their extraction had been restored by 93 seconds of correct technical procedure. She had known it would work. That was not the same as not caring whether it did. Vega was not where she had been standing. She had relocated to the far side of the motor pool, near the vehicle maintenance logs, in the particular way of someone seeking geographic distance from a sequence of events they would prefer to be less proximate to. She was not hiding. She was a staff sergeant, and she understood the professional consequences of appearing to hide. But she had positioned herself at the edge of what was visible and was standing there with her arms at her sides and her face arranged into the expression of someone doing something useful. Gunnery Sergeant Bowman walked to her. He stopped beside her. He looked at the maintenance logs she was ostensibly reviewing. "You want to explain to me," he said, in the conversational tone of someone who is not asking, "the commentary earlier about the work order routing?" Vega's jaw tightened. "Sergeant, you told a lieutenant that the level high contractor probably got her clearance through a paperwork error. You told 3 NCOs she didn't have the qualifications for the zone access. You said this in a flag officer's installation review in front of junior personnel about an active intelligence operator running a sanctioned JSOC operation." Vega said nothing. "Here's what's going to happen," Bowman said, with the unhurried specificity of a man who has given this kind of conversation before and has learned that the most effective delivery is the one that makes the recipient do the work. "You're going to write a formal account of every statement you made this morning about Lieutenant Colonel Riker. You're going to include the time, the location, and the personnel who heard it. You're going to give that document to me by 1600 hours today." He paused. "And then you're going to think about the difference between what you knew and what you decided." Vega's posture had adjusted by the time he finished. Not broken. She had enough professional pride for that, but reconfigured. She said, "Yes, Gunnery Sergeant." Bowman walked away. He walked to the secondary vehicle bay where Scarlett was completing the final entry in the work order documentation for W7 Delta 19. He stopped beside her and looked at what she was writing. Then he reached into the cargo pocket of his uniform and removed a small notebook, worn cover, pages dense with figures and specifications, and placed it on the transport truck hood beside her tool roll. "This is my technical reference for the communication systems in the eastern sector," he said. "The specs I've been using are from the previous generation documentation. You cited figures today that superseded the ones I had." He paused. "You can keep it. The information in it is out of date." Scarlett looked at the notebook. She looked at Bowman. "I appreciate the specificity of that," she said. Bowman nodded once. He was a man who did not need his gestures explained or expanded. He turned and walked back to the technical cluster, where Briggs's team was running the sector-wide diagnostic, and he picked up a tablet and joined them, and the quality of his engagement with the task, immediate, focused, precise, was its own kind of statement. Ward walked back through the motor pool toward the administrative building at 13:56 hours, which gave him 4 minutes to reach Hale's office by the appointed time. He walked with the correct military bearing of a man who understands that his behavior is still being observed, and it was, by Cole, by Kincaid, by 2 junior enlisted who had been assigned to vehicle maintenance in the Eastern Bay, and who had been there all morning and had seen everything. He passed through the secondary vehicle bay. He passed the exact spot where Scarlett Riker had been working when he first told her to leave. He looked at the surface she had been working on, the junction panel, still open, its contents now correctly configured and fully operational. He looked at the faint residue of contact grease on the panel's edge where her hands had been. He stopped. He stood there for 2 seconds. Then he continued walking, and his pace was the same on the other side of those 2 seconds as it was on the near side, but something had happened in them. Something small and private and not visible from the outside, which was the only place it was available to happen. Flynn, following 8 feet behind, stopped at the same spot and did not look at the junction panel. He looked at the floor and then looked up and walked faster. By 1400 hours, the motor pool had reorganized itself into the functional rhythm of an installation resuming operations after a disruption. Vehicles were being assessed. Technicians were running diagnostics. The Duty Communications NCO was logging the extraction completion and beginning the formal incident report that the next 12 hours would require. The shape of the morning was already resolving into documentation, into the official record, into the language of reports that would travel up the chain of command and produce, at their terminus, consequences that most of the people in the motor pool would never directly observe but would feel in the way institutions feel things, slowly, systemically, through the accumulation of small structural changes that add up to something different over time. The extraction vehicle returned to the installation at 14:22 hours. Scarlett heard the sound of it, the specific engine signature of a military transport moving at a pace that is faster than routine but not emergency, and she registered it without changing what she was doing, which was completing the final verification signature on the Vkep Getchnoi Bay Getnoi Delta Getchnoi Mui Chin work order. She signed it, Riker L, contractor, level high. The same name, the same classification, the same handwriting that had been on the work order when she arrived. Briggs watched her sign it. "Why that name?" he said. "It's my name," she said. "One of them." She folded the work order along its original crease lines and placed it in the work order repository box on the wall of the secondary bay. The same box where it would have gone if the morning had proceeded exactly as planned, as if a level high maintenance contractor had come, done her work, and left. Then she picked up her tool roll, tucked it under her arm, and looked around the secondary vehicle bay with the systematic attention of someone verifying that nothing has been left behind. Nothing had. We're almost at the end, and trust us, the last 2 minutes of this story will stay with you. Before we get there, tell us in the comments, which moment hit hardest? Was it the radio code, the Admiral's salute, or the moment Ward realized who he'd just humiliated in front of 30 witnesses and a flag officer? Subscribe if you haven't already, and we'll see you in the next one. Hale was waiting for her at the edge of the motor pool near the staff car. His aide had brought the vehicle forward from the administrative building, which meant the formal inspection review had been concluded or suspended, either outcome consistent with the kind of morning that had just happened. He was standing in the California afternoon light with his hands clasped behind his back and the expression of a man who has one more thing to say and is deciding how to say it. Scarlett stopped in front of him. She did not come to attention. They were not in a formal context, and Hale had not set up the conversation to require it. "The J-High briefing," he said, 1400 tomorrow. I'll need the complete technical documentation of the frequency exploitation and the 6-week surveillance record. Captain Holt has everything organized. She can present it without me." Hale looked at her. "You could present it yourself." "Yes, sir. If you had official designation, standing orders, a posting." Scarlett waited. "I'm offering you a formal advisory position," Hale said. "Senior Technical Consultant, Naval Special Warfare Command. Full reinstatement of rank for the purposes of the posting. Your operational methods would have institutional backing this time." The afternoon light was moving across the motor pool, long and flat, the particular gold of California at the beginning of evening. The motor pool was quieter now. The technical teams were still working, the documentation was still being produced, but the acute energy of the crisis had dissipated, leaving behind the steady hum of an installation at work. Scarlett looked at Hale. She thought about the secondary vehicle bay, the angle of the security camera, the way she had positioned the transport truck to block the sightline, the way she had absorbed 6 weeks of motor pool dynamics, who stood where, who talked to whom, who moved in which patterns, and used that absorption to map the specific anomaly of Tate's behavior against the background of everything else. She had been able to do that because she was not a lieutenant colonel in an advisory position. She was a level-high contractor in work pants with grease on her knuckles, and nobody had looked at her carefully enough to see what she was doing until it was done. "With respect, Admiral," she said, "I do better work when nobody knows who I am." Hale looked at her for a long moment. His expression had arrived at something that was not disagreement and not resignation, but something more complex than both. The understanding of a man who has seen enough of the world to know when an argument is not available to him and when the person in front of him is right. "The program," he said. "Cipher run. It's still listed as dissolved." "Yes, sir. The dissolution documentation is in the archived record." "It is." He held her gaze. "And the personnel?" She met his eyes without shifting. "Redistributed," she said. He absorbed this the same way he had absorbed it the first time she had said it, completely without visible reaction. The way a man absorbs information when he has spent long enough at the level where information is a resource and not a performance. "The phone call you'll get tomorrow morning," he said. "Early, before 0600. That'll be my office." "I'll answer it," she said. He nodded. He extended his right hand. She took it. His grip was the grip of a man who had spent decades in conditions that test character, and who had learned that the quality of a handshake is not about force, but about honesty. About the moment of contact meaning what both parties understand it to mean. It meant something. They both understood what. He turned, walked to the staff car, and was driven out of the motor pool with the unhurried authority with which he had arrived. Scarlett watched the vehicle reach the main gate and turn onto the installation road, and then she turned away. Holt was waiting at the edge of the secondary vehicle bay. She had positioned herself there with the natural ease of someone who belongs anywhere she chooses to stand, and she was watching Scarlett with the expression of a woman who has spent 3 years waiting for a specific conversation to be available and is now standing at the edge of it. "Chicago," Scarlett said. "Chicago," Holt confirmed. "The message came in at 0942 while you were on the radio." Holt paused. "I was going to tell you after the securing." "I know." Scarlett looked at her. "How many?" Holt's expression shifted. A small, controlled adjustment, the kind that contains information it has not yet released. "Not 2, she said. Scarlett waited. "The routing on the Chicago contact matches a frequency signature I flagged 8 months ago," Holt said. "Before this operation, before Tate." She looked at her tablet. "Same spectral pattern, different installation, different operator." She looked up. "There are more of them, Scarlett." The motor pool was very quiet in that moment, the productive quiet of an installation working, not the shocked quiet of one absorbing revelation. Engines, diagnostic equipment, the distant sound of the extraction vehicle completing its debrief cycle, the specific functional noise of a place doing what it is designed to do. Scarlett looked at the motor pool, at Briggs with his technical team, at Cole standing at the entrance of the eastern bay, at Hayes near the vehicle maintenance logs, at the AN Gach Cheo V RC Gach Noi Mot Kong, fully operational, its frequency display clean and green, at the junction panel in the secondary bay, correctly configured, doing its job. She looked at all of it with the patient, systematic attention of someone taking inventory. 2 people isn't going to be enough, Holt said. "No," Scarlett said. "It's not." She picked up her tool roll from the transport truck hood. She tucked it under her arm. She looked at Holt. "How long to Chicago?" 4 hours by air. We'd need to move tonight to make the timeline." Scarlett thought about the motor pool. About 6 weeks of early mornings and late evenings in work pants in Greece, mapping a frequency anomaly from the inside until she could see its exact shape, until she could stand at a communications console and in 93 seconds undo 6 weeks of someone else's careful work. About the 7 tools in 8 seconds and the 42-inch-pound torque specification and the 17.4 decibel anti-jam margin, all of it knowledge she was not supposed to have, all of it deployed in a motor pool where nobody looked at her carefully enough to understand what they were seeing. She thought about Hale's handshake, the phone call before 0600 tomorrow. She thought about Cole, 19 years old, standing at the entrance of the motor pool with his phone in his pocket instead of in his hand, having understood something about the difference between recording a moment and being in it. She thought about Briggs, who had stayed in the secondary vehicle bay and watched her work when everyone else had accepted an easy explanation, and who had cross-referenced 3 technical databases and sat with the discomfort of not being certain, rather than accepting the comfortable version of what was in front of him. She thought about Tate, who had been patient and careful and present for 6 weeks, and who had been 1 frequency configuration away from preventing an extraction. She thought about the text message on the encrypted phone in the compartment behind the gear shift of her truck. 1 line. No sender, no unit identifier. Cipher run phase 2. Authorization pending. Report Chicago 0600 Tuesday. Authorization pending. Not authorized. Not confirmed. Someone was waiting for her to authorize it. "Tell me about the spectral signature," she said to Holt. Holt opened her tablet. She rotated it so Scarlett could see the screen. A frequency analysis display, the kind that maps signal distribution across a spectrum over time, the kind that looks like a weather map to most people and like a fingerprint to people who know how to read them. Scarlett studied it. She studied it the way she studied everything, systematically, unhurriedly, beginning at the edges and moving inward, the way you approach a problem when you understand that the edges tell you as much as the center, and that the center means nothing if you don't know what surrounds it. Same operator, she said. That's my read. Or same protocol. Different operator trained on the same protocol. Holt was quiet for a moment. That's worse, she said. Yes, Scarlett said. It is. She handed the tablet back. She looked at the motor pool one more time. The complete view, from the main gate to the secondary vehicle bay, from the AN Gach Cheo VRC Gach Noi Mot Mot Kong to the junction panel whose configuration would tell the next person who opened it exactly how to read the frequency exploitation that Tate had been running. She had left that configuration as documentation, not just as a repair. Whoever came after her on this installation would have a record, if they knew how to read it. Briggs would know how to read it. She turned away from the motor pool and walked toward the civilian parking area, and her pace was the same pace she had maintained all morning, unhurried even, neither urgent nor reluctant, the pace of someone who has a destination and intends to reach it. Cole saw her go. He was standing at the entrance of the eastern bay, and he watched her walk across the motor pool toward the civilian lot, her tool roll under her arm, her work boots making the same sound they had made 8 hours ago when she arrived. The same woman. The same walk. In the same clothes with the same badge on her chest that said, Riker L. Civilian Maintenance, Level High. And somehow she was completely different, and somehow she was exactly the same, and that paradox sat in Cole's chest in a way he did not have the language for yet. He was 19. He would develop the language. But the thing it would describe, the understanding that the person you are looking at and the person you see are sometimes separated by a gap that says more about you than about them. That was already resident in him now, installed permanently, in the 8 seconds of watching a woman pick up 7 tools. Briggs materialized beside him. He looked at the place where Scarlett had been, and then at the direction she was walking. How did you know? Cole said. He said it quietly. Not to the motor pool, to Briggs. Briggs looked at him. I didn't know, he said. I knew that something didn't fit, the torque specification, the contact resistance figure, numbers that aren't in the documentation I have access to. He paused. I knew something was wrong with what I was seeing, not what was right about it. There's a difference. What is the difference? Briggs considered this with the unhurriedness of someone who has thought about it before and understands that it deserves a real answer, not a fast one. Knowing something is wrong with what you're seeing means you stay, he said. Knowing what's right would have told me what to do. I didn't have that, so I stayed and watched and stayed in the questions until the answers showed up. He looked at the secondary vehicle bay, at the open junction panel that Scarlett had repaired and configured and documented in the form of a correct configuration anyone with sufficient clearance could now read. That's usually how it works. You don't have to know the answer. You have to know that you don't have enough information yet to be done looking. Cole thought about laughing, about the 8 seconds after, when the laugh had gone wrong in his mouth, about the moment his instinct had told him something was off and he had overridden it with the easier social calculus. I'm going to think about today for a long time, he said. That's the point of days like this, Briggs said. In the civilian parking lot, Scarlett unlocked the truck and set the tool roll in the back seat with the same care she had used to pack it, each piece in its designated position. She opened the driver's door, got in, sat for a moment. The parking lot was quiet. Through the windshield, she could see a portion of the motor pool, the eastern bay, the roof of the administrative building, the edge of the flight line. She could see the gate where Hale's convoy had entered at 07:53 hours. She could see the secondary vehicle bay, though not its interior. She reached into the compartment behind the gearshift and took out the encrypted phone. She looked at the screen. The deleted message was gone. No trace, nothing to find, which was by design. But the address remained in her memory, which was also by design. 0600, Chicago, Tuesday. Today was Monday. She put the phone back and looked up at the rearview mirror. The motor pool was reflected in it. The angle provided a view of the AN Gach Cheo VRC Gach Noi Mot Mot Kung station, of the technical team running diagnostics, of Hayes walking toward the vehicle maintenance logs, the world going back to its work, adjusted. She was looking at the mirror when Holt knocked on the passenger window. She lowered it. Holt leaned on the door frame. She did not say hello. They had said everything Hello covers in 6 weeks of working the same operation from different angles. She said, "There's something else." Scarlett waited. "The Chicago contact," Holt said. "When I ran the routing trace, I flagged a secondary address. The message didn't originate from Chicago." She paused. "Chicago is a waypoint. Where did it originate?" Holt looked at her steadily. "I'm still tracing it, but the spectrum signature is consistent with sources I've seen before. SIGINT sources." Another pause. "From inside the community." Scarlett absorbed this. She looked at the parking lot. She looked at the rearview mirror. She looked back at Holt. "Inside JSOC," she said. "Inside something with JSOC level access." The motor pool continued its work behind her. Engines and diagnostics and the steady functional noise of an installation that was operating, that was whole, that had come within 93 seconds of a different outcome. The AN Gach Cheo VRC Gach Noi Mot Mot Kong was green. Recon Team 4 was back. Tate was in custody. The frequency exploitation that had been running for 6 weeks was documented and terminated. All of that was done, correct, resolved, and underneath it, something else was beginning. Not instead of the resolution, but below it, the way current runs below surface water. "We're going to need more people," Scarlett said. "I've been thinking about who," Holt said. "Tell me in the air." Holt straightened. She stepped back from the door. Scarlett put the truck in reverse and pulled out of the parking space in a single controlled motion, the same motion she had used to pull in 5 weeks and 3 days ago, the morning she had arrived at Marine Corps Air Station Camp Pendleton with a tool roll, a work order, and a name that was half of her name. At the gate, the guard reviewed her badge, Riker L. Civilian Maintenance, Level High, and waved her through. She drove. In the rearview mirror, the installation receded. The gate, the administrative building, the roof line of the eastern bay, the faint outline of the AN Gach Cheo VRC Gach Noi Mot Mot Kong antenna. It became smaller. It became the size of a detail in a larger frame. It became, as she put distance between herself and it, a part of the morning that had happened, and that she carried with her now in the way she carried all of them, not as weight exactly, but as calibration. Each one adjusting the instrument by a small degree, making the next reading more accurate. The encrypted phone in the console vibrated once. She did not pick it up. She knew what it said. She had known, when she wrote the message to herself 6 months ago and routed it through 3 separate anonymized addresses to arrive this morning, exactly what it would say and what it would mean when she read it. Cipher Run, Phase 2, Authorization Pending. Pending her authorization, waiting for her to say yes or not yes. She drove toward the airfield. Behind her, in the motor pool of Marine Corps Air Station Camp Pendleton, Corporal Jason Cole stood at the entrance of the eastern vehicle bay and looked at the place where a woman in work pants had picked up 7 tools in 8 seconds. He stood there for a long moment, then he went back to work. At the communications console, the AN Gach Cheo VRC Get Noi Mot Mot Com displayed a clean green network. Every unit on the installation connected and coordinating, every frequency operating at the specifications it had been designed to meet. The system that should have failed, that had been carefully constructed to fail at the precise moment it would have mattered most, was doing exactly what it was built to do. It was doing it because someone had known what it needed, because someone had known what was wrong with it, because someone had arrived at 0630 hours in work pants and a low cap and fixed it in 93 seconds, having already understood the fault before she sat down at the console, having understood it the way she understood every frequency anomaly she had ever encountered. From the inside, from the shape of the silence around it, from the specific pattern of what was missing. Because some problems, the kind that are designed to look like other kinds of problems, can only be solved by people who have been there before. People who know what the right signal looks like because they have spent a long time in places where the right signal was the difference between extraction and no extraction, between 2 wounded operators coming home and 2 wounded operators not coming home. People who sign their work orders with the wrong name and then complete them correctly anyway because the name doesn't change the work, and the work is what they came to do. Scarlett Riker drove east into the California afternoon, and somewhere ahead of her the airfield was waiting, and somewhere further ahead than that Chicago was waiting, and somewhere further than that a frequency signature was generating itself from a source that shouldn't have it, patterned like a fingerprint she had seen before, spelling out in the specific grammar of signal exploitation the contours of a problem that was larger than one installation, larger than one morning, larger than one correctly repaired communications relay. Spectre Actual. Mission continues.